Welcome to Belief, Being, and Beyond with your host, Granddaughter Crow. Hi, everybody. Granddaughter Crow here for yet another episode of Belief, Being, and Beyond. And I got a jewel here for you. Someone who I crossed paths with in a ritual space with the missing witches, missingwitches.com. Call out to the missing witches, check them out. But here is a gem, here is a jewel. Today I have Amy Miranda. Now, if you haven't heard of her, that doesn't mean that you haven't seen or heard of things that she has been a part of. Let me kind of introduce you before we bring her on. So, Amy is a witch, of course, a medium and a spiritualist who demystifies mystical, which is what I love to do. So, before being called to service and healing work, Amy spent over 20 years working in media, right? As in a global award executive, producer, and creative. So, she was in that arena. And basically, I mean, we're talking big stuff here. I can't even list it. You can Google her or look below. So, a few years into the launch of her creative company, Lunch, because you need to order lunch and it should be easy, like ordering lunch. I love it. Amy began following her personal breadcrumbs, which I love that, and examine her own 10,000-foot view, which we're going to be doing the 10,000-foot view as well as the breadcrumbs on the ground, people. We're going to the cosmos and bringing it here for you. So, in working through her own healing journey, she finally named her trauma. She named her trauma and then was able to transmute that poison to medicine in pursuit of justice and change. Whew, we need justice and change. And her unique background brings a fresh, wonder filled perspective by shining new light on old ways and bringing a new lens, which is also what I love to do for you guys on the show, and creative pursuit to the collective consciousness. I mean, it goes on and on, but I got to tell you, she is amazing, amazing, amazing. Basically, she also has this book, and I got to tell you, just to kind of give you a little bit of a clue of what I'm saying, that Amy has been out there bringing us stuff, been a part of bringing us stuff. Public Enemy, whoop, whoop. You guys remember Public Enemy? Chuck D describes her as relentless. We need relentless in this day and age. I am so excited. I mean, there's so many prompts that I can give you, but then again, I'm like looking at you and I'm like, sister, I know you. So anyway, welcome Amy to Belief Being and Beyond podcast.
Thank you so much, GDC. I feel like the muscles hurt in my face from smiling. So thank you so much for such a beautiful introduction. I feel like that was like one of those spirit tunnels that they could do on the Jennifer Hudson show, or like when a fighter comes into the UFC. That was what that felt like to me. So thank you. And yeah, fight the power.
Yeah, absolutely. Here we go. You know, it's really kind of interesting. Before we get into the dialogue, I have to tell the listeners the core of what we're going to be talking about because we're going to be flying to the universe and back. But the core of what we're going to be talking about is Amy's book here, you guys, What We've Forgotten. What We've Forgotten. And it is worth its weight in gold. And it's an interdimensional, my jam. I love interdimensional adventures to remembering the wander within. Okay, so of course we're kind of born like this, right? We're kind of born into like a I'm a little different, and we're kind of born with this drive. And we have these childhoods of seeing things and all of this and discovery. And what's interesting as I was doing a deep dive into your life's lived experience, you went into media, creative, executive producer, international awards, all of that kind of stuff. And then you lost yourself because of that. And now I'm going to ask you about that
Mhm.
because I too was born a mystic. Ah, da 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 da, my story, whatever. And then I went into leadership, international company, working my way up, investor relations, public relations. It's not media, but it was media relations. And it was like this whole thing of pouring out myself
Yeah.
for the quote unquote corporate, the man, the whatever. And then I lost myself too, my dear. I felt like a puppet. I felt like my soul was muzzled, and I felt like if I stayed any longer, either they were going to kick me out, or I was going to die, or I was going to turn into a literal puppet because that's where I was headed. And so it's really, really kind of crazy because I left in 2008.
Wow.
And I started major consulting doing business as Granddaughter Crow in 2008. And that's what I've been doing. And now look at you. Tell us your story. Give us a little synopsis about what causes, like a little personal story, but what
Yeah.
causes that phenomenon that both you and I experienced.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you. I love that we're just going right into the deep and the depth. I'm so excited. Talking about adventure, right? And I think that's growing up, right? Like I always, there was something different going on, and there was a bunch of reasons why that was the case. But I was lucky to find like a little friend early who helped to normalize discussions about the unseen as a kid, which I think was really helpful. And I survived because of art. I mean, a lot of the things that happened in my childhood, it was like I survived because of creating. And I'm an only child, and without having collaborators, both now I recognize in spirit and in ordinary reality, I wouldn't have made it to being able to work in media. So I think basically my journey was, finding the others in the arts. And, I ended up going to film school. I went to an arts high school and was in the drama program. And that was the first time I realized, like, oh, okay, I'm not an actor. And that's where I got behind the camera, right? And so to speak, right? It was like, I want to be in the back. And I'm definitely an introvert dressed like an extrovert. And I always
Oh,
was,
two. You
right?
wouldn't guess it, guys.
Yeah, exactly. But I think it was part of, the embodiment of creative. I mean, my niece always says to me, like, why do you wear so much makeup? She's 6. People ask me that who are adults too. But I mean, the reason is I'm an artist and every day is an art project. So that was sort of the underpinning of my entire existence on the planet. Was that was the time where I felt safe. That was the time where bringing ideas into reality. It never had occurred to me that that was witchcraft. I mean, I liked witches, and I was a kid, like I was really drawn to ancient stuff and like mysteries of the unknown books and, mystic places. And so for me, getting into places where I was working in creative spaces, I started my career at CNN and then ended up in advertising only by way of layoffs and technology, and trying to sort of win at capitalism in the, the the content media industrial complex, right? Without realizing, I mean, you can't really win capitalism. So this idea of working my way up, and because I was so traumatized, my deal essentially was I'm going to fill that cup with inauthentic power. I'm going to, because that was the only power I knew about, was the power that you get from other people or from things that are not authentic. And so for me, it was a matter of like, okay, well, when will the fire be? I just didn't know that yet. So I thought everything was going great. I was like, I had had major loss. I had lost my best friend 2 days before my 19th birthday. And that sort of pushed, I always talk about like the 7-layer burrito of trauma. that kind of pushed things down so that the stuff that was on the top was the most recent trauma, and the stuff that happened when I was a kid was like, that's not even on the radar. So my, answer to escaping what had happened to me was, I'm going to make my best friend proud of me by, my perception of myself was like I was just a total piece of shit and I shouldn't have been the one that made it. And she, I felt like the universe had made a huge mistake. So for me, it was really trying to find validation externally from people. And so I ended up working in, media, and ended up, producing global campaigns and winning gold lions and doing all the things that most people go into media to do. And it wasn't feeling any better for me. And I was going through a lot of challenges working for people that claimed to be creative, who were capitalists, who I was like, whoa, what is this? Like, I thought we were helping artists. I thought we were, and of course, I've always been a bit of a punk rocker. So my response to that, which was the unhealed response, I'm not recommending people do this, but I basically was like, fuck the system. And totally got fired. I mean, that was exactly what you talked about this is either going to kill me or they're going to force me. And I mean, I got forced out. And of course, what I think, I didn't realize at the time was like, in any face of any adversity, I'm like, watch this. That's how I survived everything. So that was where I founded the creative company that I still am at the helm of 17 years later. And I've never done anything that long, including being married. I've been in practice now, shamanic healing for 10 years. But the idea of when will the fire be essentially was like, when will this thing collapse because it's built on a foundation of rot, right? It was just a
Yeah,
bunch of rotten stuff.
right,
And so I ended up having, a major healing crisis after I founded Lunch because it was the first time that I didn't have an oppressor.
right.
And so it was the first time that I was like, oh, wait a minute, I'm not well. Like, things aren't good here. This isn't normal to have a state of success and still be literally like, everyone's out to get me. Um, and so by way of total magic and synchronicity, ended up finding the man who would become my teacher and had, what's called the soul retrieval. And I just thought at the time, like, this is just going to help me because this guy does this all the time and like nobody else has been able to help me. So this is going to help me. And I laugh because I remember emailing him after and being like, thanks for the healing, as if I was never going to talk to him again, which was very like the capitalist approach, right? I'm like, thank you very much, bye bye. And didn't realize at the time that, I mean, it would be the new foundation of everything. And really, I had to go through the moment of going, okay, well, am I an executive producer because I like power and control, or am I an executive producer because I like to create?
Right.
And that became a big part of the conversation. And that's sort of what led to me starting to walk more between the worlds of, yes, I'm a witch and a survivor of, the unnamed trauma, which is childhood sexual abuse by my father, and going down that path of how much do I want people to know? And the answer was everything, everything, because it was how I could find the others. And of course, when I went through my initial disclosure in the media industry, everyone said me too on some level. So some of it was sexual abuse, some of it was emotional abuse, some of it was physical abuse, but everyone that was around me had a story. And I thought, okay, this was a signal and a transmission that I had been sending out. And realizing that as much as we, tend to beat ourselves up for times of our lives where we were asleep at the wheel, so to speak. And I mean, I had been in a car accident where I fell asleep at the wheel and like totaled the car, but that didn't pull me out of it, right? Like that still didn't work. For me, it takes, and people who are close to me know this, they're always like, why does it take so many times? I'm like, because I'm stubborn, right? I'm stubborn. And so
Relentless, relentless.
yeah, relentless, right? Thank you for the reframing. But yeah, this idea of transmuting those and realizing that people who had said that I was intense or a bitch or those words that get used to describe powerful women me realizing that the transmutation of that, and it was Sandra Ingerman who helped me to name it, which was potent. It's potent. It's not intense. It's not intimidating. It's potent. And starting to recognize that I could transmute the darkness into light and poison to medicine, and that I could help other people, hopefully, to be able to remember how to do that. And so that was where the book came from, was that interdimensional adventure, because all of the locations, spoiler alert, in the book can be visited through Journey Space.
Yes.
Um, but because it was like we should have gotten these instructions, and I call them the uninvited, but those who, the patriarchy, colonial, those people.
White
And
supremacists,
yeah,
absolutely. Call
yeah,
them out. If we're going to
yeah.
name our trauma, we might as well name them too.
Yeah, and it's so I call them the uninvited because nobody invited them. And so this idea of ejecting them from these systems that, capitalism is here. Like it's not, gonna go away lightly and gently. So this idea of how can I try to sort of merge my experience in business on a global scale into trying to translate what I've learned, which I always joke about, we're going to Nerd Town. Because I mean, I was an IT manager, so this idea of taking that as a map and applying it was what I had learned. And of course, that's the irony of, the original question of what's my story? The story has been folded. It's like one of those Mad magazine fold-ins. Like it just keeps getting folded in on itself, where I'm realizing that we as human beings, like it's really just a measure of how good are we at being ourselves and how much can we lean into where our authentic power sits, and then recognizing that the 10,000 foot view of my life was, oh, I was doing magic by creating all these things, and I am an alchemist by putting all these different types of people together and the successes that those people had. What happens if I put on the glasses myself? So that was really the culmination of me realizing, like, oh, I'm supposed to use all the skills that I have as a human being versus what capitalism tells us, which is choose one and that's what you're gonna win. You're gonna win capitalism. And it's like, I won capitalism and I didn't get any prizes. So for me, it was about, okay, well, how can we go into the system and do what I've done in media for years, which is disrupt it. And the system is not built by, source or nature. The system was built by the uninvited who infiltrated all these areas and then called it theirs. So I think that's the 10,000 foot view of sort of how I got here. And really looking at the application of what I had ended up doing and the environments that I found myself in, and then looking at why. And it was because it was all I ever knew. All I ever knew was oppression from the moment I got here. So once I had sort of freed myself from the rusty cage, so to speak, it was like A, a new pair of glasses, B, a new lens in the projector, and then C, what happens if I try to do this more intentionally when I'm well?
Yes. Yes.
So that's my long-winded answer
It's
of,
a beautiful answer because a couple of things. Hegel, which is a philosopher, talks about spirit, objective spirit, subjective spirit, and absolute spirit. And absolute spirit is that of creativity. And so it makes so much sense to me that that would be your like lifesaver, that the life raft. And then it's so beautiful because in my lived experience, I too climbed the Golden Tower and found myself up there doing the same thing, in my own way. And then because of a series of events, because I wasn't listening, I too have what I call tenacity, relentlessness, whatever. It's that drive, right? And I was down for the count because well, I was on my deathbed, long story short. And it was right after that. And then things started falling in on me. And I was kind of like, okay, I don't even, I can't even hear my own voice. And then coming out of that and finding the spirituality once again and finding that, wait, all of those tools that I had found and that I had worked with, why not utilize those for this? And so in my looking at my life, one spiritualist to another, I'm like, from my position, I'm like, Amy, of course, our souls decided to get hurt when we were little, move into the whole system, and then call bullshit on it as we grew and got older, because now we know we're not just talking, ooh, I'm a woo woo. No, we're talking, I am a nerd. I am well read. I know how to make the money in the golden handcuffs. I know the system. And so it makes it very important that our lived experience has that. And I just found it so fascinating. I found it so fascinating that, I mean, 10,000 foot view, you know, could it be that you and I and other like-minded spirits decided to come down, incarnate into this life, and experience all of this to the nth degree, where we won the fake award in order to call bullshit on it and to help people in a real practical way to move forward. And so, yeah, there's so much I could unpack and we could talk for hours, but I kind of see that and I'm like, oh, sister. Okay, so in your book, before we even open it up,
Yeah.
what is on the cover? Is that like, you guys, and I'll put a big shot on there, and you guys can take a look at it. Um, if I'm not mistaken, that's Sirius, right? That's planet Sirius.
So now I have to tell you, I'm laughing because I have to tell you the story of this. So I had
Please do.
a lot of the book came to me in dreams because I was asking for assistance because spirit, I mean, it's creator, it's artist number one. So I go for help because I'm not that smart as I mean, and I say this with respect to myself, but it's like I'm human. I only have like a limited capacity to carry knowledge. So I go to the expert in the, in the ether, the great they them. So I was asking for help and I was channeling, and they showed me the cover. So I woke up and I drew it, and it was three keyholes, and then like this light coming through, and then there were like two kind of faces looking at each other, and it was like, at the end of the adventure is because there's three sections in the book, so it made sense, like three keyholes, three doorways, three, and then at the end of it, the end of the adventure was a light heart, a heart of light, and this kind of. So I worked with an incredible designer on the book named Nick Taylor from Thunderwing, who does all of the library of esoterica books for Taschen. Like that is who is the man who's behind that work, Thunderwing, for Jess Hundley's books. So he and I were working together, and I came to him because I'm an artist and I'm a producer. I came to him with all this stuff, and I was like, okay, here's what we're gonna do. And I said, I've got my friend Nathan Juravicius, who's the designer of Scary Girl. He's a good friend and a collaborator through lunch. And I was like, he's gonna do this illustration, and then we're gonna put these like realities in there. And of course, it was hard to get it from here to here because I was trying to sort of translate what I was seeing, and at the time, the person I was working with basically was like, "This isn't working. Like we're not there." And I had to have like a pretty tense conversation and say, "You're not going to be the one to change it if someone's looking for this." So as we're working on it together, it ends up that, and I kept getting told that I was going to do the cover, and I was like, I don't know about that. Anyway, I did. So of course, because it was just so there was a sort of a starburst that we were using in there. And so the titling on the cover of the book has like a texture to it. That is a piece of meteorite from my collection. So, and then the background, there's lapis from my collection. So I wanted, to really infuse the cover. So I was thinking, okay, we've got to get like a shot of Sirius. And then my husband said to me, why don't you call Peter Roth, who's a good friend of mine, who's an astrophotographer? And so I called him and I texted him and I said, "Do you have a picture of Sirius?" And he goes, "Yeah, I have this one and it looks like a heart." And I was like, "Great." And I said, "I want to pay you." And he was like, "No, no, just use it." So it's a photograph of Sirius. And it looks like a heart because that's what's at the end of the adventure. But so to bring it back around about me saying if someone was looking for this book, someone was looking for it. So I have a client now who found me because she suffered a major loss. She lost her son, and she had two dreams. One of them was the cover of the book, and the other dream was him telling her to find Amy. And so, yeah, so just yeah.
I
So they were looking for the book, and I mean, it needed to come out at a certain time. Same thing, I was told that. So it was beautiful to end up following that breadcrumb. And especially as a creative person, we second guess our own skills. Where I was like, I need to hire someone to do, and sure, I did. There were design elements, there was beautiful collaboration with Nick, but he was the one who said to me, "You have to do it." And I was like, okay, so like 90% of what's in there in terms of illustration work, the art, I mean, it was art that I still have the pencil sketches of that I channeled, and then we had to figure out how to sort of bring it into um, reality. And my grandmother's an oil painter, so she painted this piece behind me when she was like 87 years old. So I didn't ever want anyone to know that I was an artist. But of course, it was the spiritual setup of the century where they were like, not only are you going to tell your story, you're going to do the artwork and everyone's going to know the truth. And I was like, oh. So, and I remember saying to the man who became my teacher, Daniel, I was like, why is this happening? And he was like, because you're like, it's part of the journey. Like you're doing something and telling a story for people. But of course, you're going to get tested in the process of, are you sure? And,
Mhm.
spirit, as we say, we can be tenacious or relentless, and spirit's the same, where it kept
Yes.
leaning in and being like, do you
Yes.
want this? Are you sure? And I was like, yeah, every time, yeah. So, and I definitely got tested through the process. But yeah, that was one of the funny stories of like how the cover came together. But yes, it
You
is serious.
beautiful thing is that right around 2008, 2005, 2006, 2007, 2008, when Spirit was like, go jump, you need to be Granddaughter Crow. And I didn't even have the name Granddaughter Crow and all that. I connected with Sirius, the dog star. I started looking into ancient Egypt. If you look at my logo, I've got the Eye of Horus. And I started going all the way back to studying all of that like nerds, right? Like we're the
Yes,
nerd
yeah.
people. And you go through and you look at like the Anunnaki, and then you go through and then the gold, and then you go through and then all of a sudden you study hermetics, and then you study the clairs, and then you study the science. And I'm just like, like, did we know each other in ancient Egypt? That's where my mind goes. Sorry,
Oh, for
people.
sure. For
I'm
sure.
like, yeah, I'm like, did we
Yeah.
decide to come back again? I mean, it's just a really surreal soul recognition. Even, however you guys want to take it is how you take it. But when I saw that, I'm just like, hello, I collect keys. I align with the dog star. I'm born the year of the dog. That is like if I was an alien, I would come from Sirius. Like all of the things, I've been there and flown around the cosmos, and yet the ability to take that and bring it back into the groundedness is something that both you and I do, and we do it in threes, which is really another beautiful thing. So earlier you were talking about in your work in media and all of this, you had the tools and you knew how to do roadmaps. You knew how to put things together. You knew how to do. So did I. That's one thing that I did. And it's so interesting because in the book, you literally have the three chapters, and this is what blew me away. You've got, well, not chapters, there are three sections, and we'll get a little bit more into the book: knowing, receiving, and becoming. And I'm like, Amy, knowing, receiving, becoming, Granddaughter Crow, belief, being, beyond. Roadmaps, people. And then I get in it and you talk about, oh my God, these pages are absolutely amazing. But you talk about like the seven principles of Hermetics, and
Yeah.
you talk about the clairs, and you talk about the elements, and you talk about the foundation. So it's not like you just flew up to the sky and came back with a bunch of stuff that we're like, what? I can't speak your language. You grounded it into something that is tangible. And actually, this is the most beautiful part, and I'll kick it over to you. You helped us to create in our mind's eye a palace with rooms. In the book, people, in the book, you got to go into your palace, into the gardens, into everything, and take this journey because it will help you to remember. And in this interdimensional space, so basically, it's interesting to me because from another bird's eye view, one bird to another, I'm like, wait, we took the tools that we were given in the system and actually use them to do a fundamental foundational roadmap to help people to go within, give them texture, give them a roadmap to find and remember who they truly are. Now, that is not a question, my dear. That was a statement of joy. But I'm going to kick it over to you to see what does Amy have to say about to the stars and back, Amy, to the
Oh,
stars and
I'm
back.
so excited. So the first thing I want to say is, yeah, the chapters, and there's a map in the book, and the map in the book is a key. And Nick and I realized it as we were laying it out because I drew it and then we were laying it out together and he was sharing his screen and then as we were laying it out I was like, oh, it's a key, and he was like, it is, and we kind of both turned to the side and it's a key. So, and of course it is, right? And I wouldn't have, I mean, again, conceptually I've done a lot of work, but this is divine, right? This was a collaboration between spirit and myself, and it was a lot of pressure, and it was a lot of, because it was, and I know you probably have a similar process where like I journey for everything. If I need to make a big decision, like I'm going to go talk to the universe first and see what they have to say before I'm making human decisions, because I respect myself now enough to know what I don't know. So, and I have so many funny stories about trying to publish this book and like some of the funny things that happened to me where because I'm still, I mean, I'm a human being. So there's times where I would go and ask for advice and then I'd be like, thanks very much. And of course, spiritually, the conversation wasn't over. I would just leave thinking I knew what they were trying to tell me. And of course, that's part of the discernment that I have to have as a practitioner of, magic, healing arts, whatever we want to call it, because I need to make sure that because this, we use our dear mutual friend Zoe Flowers, this idea of the heroine's journey and the hero's journey, and the idea that there are tricksters, like that is part of the archetypes that are around. So remembering that. And so the funny part about us talking about Sirius and the dog star, the it's a temple of wonder, but and people have asked me like, is this the temple of the dog star? I'm like, yeah, of course it is. So and that's the fun part is for me, the the rooms in the book showed up as I was looking at, because I was teaching this or reminding people, I hate to say teaching, I was reminding people of this, helping people to remember this, doing workshops and online retreats during the pandemic. And it was very it was very advertising presentation style, right? I mean, that was what I'm used to doing as a producer. So I was leading people through the temple. And so the first draft of the book that I wrote was like 600 pages.
Oh my God.
And I remember sending it to Sandra Ingerman, and now I'm so embarrassed because it was like I was asking her to read my journal, and she read it, and she emailed me, and she was like, "Is this a book about shamanism, or is this a book about, you know, is this like an autobiography?" And then before I even answered her, she was like, "You already answered me, like in the ether." And I'm like, "Yeah, it's a book about shamanism. I mean, it's a book. It's through the lens of my experiences, but it was about." The foundational components, and when the rooms came through, because I started to dream about them, because that they weren't, the temple thing was not in the first edition of What We've Forgotten in terms of the retreat. It didn't exist. And so realizing that it needed a container, and realizing that these places that I was going in journey space were the places that were showing me what was going to be in the book. And so the most beautiful part was when the book came out was people messaging me and saying, "How did you know where I meditate from?" Or how did you know, that this was, and, or when people look at the book, people saying they had been there. And my favorite has been kids. I have a great video of my nephew looking at the book when he was like, before he was 2, he would wake up in the middle of the night and just come into their bedroom and look through the book. But kids have taken it to school. So whatever's vibrating in there, they remember it. And so for me, it was about just trying to do the best job I could of bringing it down from, and I think of that agreement, that soul agreement with Source to say, I'm going to do this project. I'm going to try to tell this story. I'm going to try to translate this, and using these different rooms or vibrations so that people could more easily tune into what we're talking about. So, and also transmuting some of those spaces, right? And transmuting the idea of like, what is a church? And of course, you know, we use the inner sanctum in the book, but this idea of people, you know, starting to realize that the uninvited made it into a thing where you go on Sundays, we're going to control what happens in the room. We're going to give you these buckets and you're going to put money in and you're not going to connect. And I mean, I grew up Catholic, but which I'm still recovering from that idea that you have to communicate through a priest or through this person that is a man of God, and then they're going to talk to God for you. And I remember as a kid being like, no, no, that's not how it's going to go. And I think people are starting to realize that those connections can happen every day of the week. It's not just on Sunday at this time. And unless you want it to be, unless, you know, but I think that's the idea, that I tried to sort of convey in the book is what can people's favorite room be? Where are you going to worship, right? Where are you going to take that time to be in commune with your soul? And where are you going to be in, you know, some people like to spend time in the library of the book, which that's the most nerdy, right? It's the part where we're talking about what is the actual foundation of this work. And as you talked about, I mean, where is the energy from? Where did the beliefs start on the planet? Why are there pyramids on every continent almost? So this idea of looking at things from a 10,000-foot view and trying to put them in a container that was going to give people sort of 3 key parts of knowledge, which is why there's that 3 sections. But I mean, I drove the people I was working with nuts because I was like, it needs to be 369 pages. It has to be like, there was very specific, what's the word count? And it was like, people were like, what? But that was the kind of stuff where just trying to understand what the framework is so that people can have, again, a solid foundation. And the thing that I was moved to say as you were talking was this idea of people are trying to escape. If we think about capitalism as a system and a construct and a foundation and a building, people are trying to leave that without having another place to go. And so this idea, and one of my helpers said it to me very succinctly, which was, you can't save people when they're drowning. And of course, I was like, that's true. Like, we just have to get everyone on the boat. Like, just get in the boat. You can decide on where you want to recreate your foundation in a minute, but just get in the boat. So, and I think that's, you know, for me, it's like, you know, as Jesus, I think, probably said similar to in the Bible, which again has gone through the uninvited lens, but, you know, we don't cast pearls before swine. And I think that's the thing. Like when you're ready to hear the knowledge or to understand it on like a cellular level or a nerd level, it gets a lot easier to entertain what's out there. I mean, I remember reading the Tao Te Ching when I was like 20 and being like, this is weird. I don't understand this. But the Tao of Pooh resonated with me. But I wasn't ready to understand the Tao Te Ching.
Mhm.
So for me, it was about trying to also create these rooms and checkpoints within the book that was protecting the knowledge as well. Because I mean, that was part of the discussions I had with my teacher were how are we going to protect this? And that was where it was like the Hall of Secrets, you know, the Hall of Mirrors. Like those are the 2 halls in the book where it's like, you know, it's like the never ending story with the Sphinxes. You don't get to pass. And a lot of people just carry the book around. They don't read it. And it's like a textbook, so that's fine. And Zoe Flowers has highlighted her entire book and written in it, which that's such an honor. So I think realizing now, what I was trying to translate, and I'm sure there's a more succinct version, but it's a big sort of tome, and it was, the things that I have learned, remembered in a way and format that I think accessible and fun, right? I mean, it's fun. We're going on an adventure together, and that's the idea, right? And I think people are scared of healing journeys because of the dark night of the soul. But thinking about the hero's journey, I mean, that's what happens before you get the treasure. So why quit there? So
Right.
that's,
Yeah.
yeah, my long-winded answer again. I could,
No,
again, this podcast will be 17 hours for those of you just
right. Tune in. Okay,
the
so
new channel.
I
Yeah.
know. Tune in to the next episode. No, okay, so check this out. We are talking about a lot of beauty and concepts, but I want to boil it down a little bit for the listeners and kind of define some of these beautiful terms. One is in the book, which Amy is one of those writers that you're like, and then what? And then what? Like, even for non-readers, like, I don't say that I'm a prolific reader. I mean, I read people and energy, but books are kind of like, oh, okay, I caught the concept. I'm reading it, and it's a little bit harder for me. Maybe I'm just that way. But this book, I was just like, and it was so beautiful. And it led me through and I haven't finished by any stretch. It is one of those things that you carry around. You need to get like a tote so that you can like strap it so we could just kind of carry it like this.
Yeah, like a
Any
little belt buckle or something. Yeah.
Absolutely. But the beauty is that it kind of leads you into your inner world in order to understand the beauty of the interdimensional world. So, and the interdimensional world is so dynamic and is always here. So for people who don't know ordinary, non-ordinary, interdimensional, how I know that's a tall order, my dear,
No,
but
I could do it.
how do
I
you
could
how
do
do you
it.
explain this
Um,
dynamic?
I always I mean, the place I always start, and it's funny because I mean, technology is a great example. It's like there's the administrative side, there's the admin panel on Facebook where you can like update, and I use Facebook as an example because most people know how to use it. But there's the administrative side where you can update your profile and like put new pictures and do all that stuff. There's the system that we can't see and we don't know how it works, but we know that we can like interact with it. And then we know that it shows on the other side. So I think of ordinary reality and non-ordinary reality like that, where non-ordinary reality is like the administrative panel that we don't understand, most of us, right? Like some of us, I think, have sort of an understanding of, because we're nerds, just like computers, where some people know how to like replace, a motherboard, and other people are like, a motherboard? What's that? And so there's that kind of analogy, which I
I like
always
that.
use for people because I think most people understand they don't need to know how one of Meta's or Google's applications works to know that they can use it.
Right.
There's some people who want to know how it works and who have become engineers or software developers or mystics and I always say like the alchemists of, magic were like the developers of, the magic system. They were like web developers or software engineers, of magic. So I always sort of think of it like that. And then I also think about it, if it is like that, then when we think about, the old term on earth as it is in heaven, that makes a lot more sense, that as above, so below idea. But I think the unseen, people have a hard time thinking about it. So I always think about it in like a programming language perspective. Same with like,
That.
when you use your, you know, operating system on a Mac or a PC. Like there's a terminal access where you can see the code, but most people are like, and so that's why I think it's funny when people talk about the Matrix and how like accurate that film was. And I think it was in so many ways, this idea of like that code that's behind the scenes that we can't see. And that's not to say it's a simulation or anything like that. I think it's just it's an intelligent system and
Absolutely.
it's built on cycles. And what I think the reason that like an administrative panel is helpful is when we make a change behind the scenes, it usually changes what we're seeing. So this
Yes.
idea of, especially in software development, bug fixes, or you find something on a site that doesn't work, and that's where we call it like a bug in the system, and then you fix it, and you have to sometimes try a few different things. If you've ever worked with a developer, software engineer, they usually know exactly sort of where it might be in the system, but or a doctor, right? It's a similar kind of like, analytics, I think, that happens, the triage when there's like a problem or when something doesn't happen in the way we expect, or electricity, there's a method. So I think software development's a good example because we can know all as much as we want about manifestation and as much as is accessible, and we can do all the research and we can have all the most amazing helpers on the other side, but it's still, you have to try different things. So sometimes it's like, well, maybe that wasn't the time where that was supposed to happen, or, and so I think that's the way that I sort of try to represent it to people. And
Yes.
this idea that we just, when that happens with the software project, you don't throw in the towel because you've tried three things, you keep
Right.
going.
Right.
And so for me, the more I understand about the things that have happened in my life, and I think that's where that annoying thing that people say of everything happens for a reason. But it does, but the reason sometimes is
Right.
for development. And I think that's
Right.
where establishing it in that way, when you think about if it is a interdimensional,
Yes.
intention-driven scavenger hunt that we're on as human beings, tracking those breadcrumbs or clues is part of those like bug fixes where we're like, okay, because I mean, I even think about my husband and like we joke, people close to me, because they're like, you dated plenty of like the Timu version of him. And I'm like, oh, I know. Like there were people that were very similar in the end to who, and I'm like, oh, that's embarrassing. Like now they just look like they were wearing like a costume of him. So those kinds of things where it just wasn't the right time. I got close, but I'm really glad I didn't stop.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that I didn't like change my vibration. I think that also relates to like space travel and stuff, where like we've been sending out these signals for years and years, and because there's light years, they may just be getting our message now. So what if we just decided to stop sending it? They would only get half. So
Right.
I think that's the way I entertain this idea that there's a lot that we can't see and that we try, right? Or like search engine optimization, I'm getting told to say, is another good example where it's like we can know as much as we want about Google,
Yes.
but
Yes.
and we could try different things or these
Yes.
algorithms, but it's like unless you pay, it's not going to go to the top. And with Spirit, they don't take cash. So it's a matter of like, and I always say when we're trying to manifest things, I'm always looking at greater good, highest good, best possible outcome for everybody.
Yes.
And so this idea that that rising tide, hopefully on the spiritual side, if there is
Yes.
some big developer, in the sky, or team of developers, or however
Right.
this works, that
Right.
maybe if we think of it as like entering like a trouble ticket, that trouble ticket's getting higher and higher up if everyone's saying the same thing. And there's like the Horton Hears a Who version of that with Dr. Seuss, but problematic examples. But I think this is the idea that, that there is something behind the scenes that is far more intelligent than
Yes.
ourselves.
I
And,
love that.
yeah, I think that would be my best way of explaining non-ordinary and ordinary reality.
I love that because, it's kind of interesting now that we're in this day and age of animation and, technology and everything.
AI, yeah.
Sometimes when I try to explain to people shamanistic journeying or, prayer or vibration or why you want to tune your channel in, sometimes I'm just like, okay, there's a thing kind of conceptually what's a spiritual algorithm.
Mhm.
And if you keep doing this and follow the breadcrumbs, so I am right there with you. So, next big question, my dear. I love that you are talking about what we've forgotten,
Mm.
and I love that you are talking about wander. So, for me, I absolutely subscribe, explain it, it's my way too to go when I'm in a session, when I'm talking to people, I'm like, there will be things that I say, but in truth, listen to what you're saying because you are remembering. And sometimes I do a play on words, like you are split apart, your members are and you are
Mm,
remembering. And so the remembering, like, oh, I put that part of my soul over here because it didn't work. Well, now it's time. And so this remembering is very much one of my pillars. And then wander is very much one of the biggest things. And I'll just put it like this. I was listening to a podcast. So I want to get your take on remembering as much as and wander. So I was listening to this podcast and Neil deGrasse Tyson was on it, right? He's out there promoting his new book. Awesome. I love it. I haven't bought it yet, but he answered this one question. I really enjoyed what he said. Somebody said, so, Neil deGrasse Tyson, what is the one question that you would love an answer to? And he went like this, what? That's not how I think. He said, how I think is, may I learn more to be able to conceive a question that I still can't understand how to ask. It is wonderment and that type of thing. So talk to us. Go for it. Talk to us about remembering what we've forgotten, remembering and wander and wonderment.
yeah. I loved, you blew my mind. I got full body goosebumps when you talked about the remembering. That is something that I haven't thought of or heard before, and that is so powerful. That's a that's a side quest that I'm looking forward to going on. Um, I think this idea of, and I mean, I through my, I mean, and I laugh about calling it shamanic training. I mean, my core of my practice and my life on the planet has been about trying to figure out who I am.
Right.
And so because of that journey, both shamanically and in reality, there's a lot of secrets. And so the idea of not being able to find the answer or of there being, I decided to sort of start to see it as like a great mystery, just like it is with, you know, solving, a game like Clue, or also looking at, the great mysteries of the universe. And I thought if I thought about it as a remembering, it would be something that was accessible,
Yes.
attainable, and whether that
Yes.
was going to be directly from the people who are alive in my lineage, or whether that was going to be happen through a spiritual experience, I was open to both. And so I think that's where wonder came in for me initially, was this idea of I don't know how, I don't know when, but I know what I would like to know, and allowing the when and the how to not be within my responsibility, and opening up. And I always talk about this idea, especially with wonder, about if we're a vessel, and I like to think of it as, maybe it's because I grew up with Mork and Mindy, but like an egg. Mork had that egg. For those younger viewers and listeners, that he had an egg that he traveled around in. It was Robin Williams. But this idea of having a vessel, and that I can travel to different places, and that I can have an experience that is both physical and emotional, both many physical, emotional, spiritual, and that I can set an intention with this spirit, this energy, this connective tissue as a destination, almost like, I'm full of analogies today, almost like Back to the Future, where I'm in the DeLorean and I'm setting the time for I want to go back. And that remembering, which for me was very loaded because I knew that I had blocked things out. I knew that I had, trauma. The idea of remembering for me, I started by just cracking the window of the egg first. I was like, I'm just gonna open just a little bit first and just see. if it's safe, and trauma survivors will know what I'm talking about, see if it's safe. And then for me, it became, oh, I don't know if I even need the windows like even up at all. I can just, and then it became, I'm going to open the sunroof and then I'm going to, because it felt safer. And there was a remembering to feeling comfortable and not having to have, and I'm not saying that you walk through the world without protection, but I'm saying having that discernment of knowing what's safe and what's not, and having this realization through wonder of realizing that, and I always say this, the spiritual equivalent of what I was doing with spirituality early on and what I was doing in my everyday life, so it matched, the vibration was, it was as if I was hanging out in front of a 7-Eleven at 4 in the morning and expecting that I was going to meet high quality people who were looking to have the same conversations I was. And then wondering why I found myself in all these environments that were so scary and out of control. And of course, looking at the history of the remembering of my own work, which was, why are these secrets? Oh, because I am, my bloodline on my father's side is we're Filipino, which I mean, that is a colonial place. And the magic was stolen. I mean, they fed medicine people to crocodiles. And the conquistadors, right? Our last name is Miranda, which, like, I don't know where that came from. I mean, it was given to us. I don't know what our real last name was. And knowing the medicine that was in that line. And that was a huge remembering because nobody even named it in my family. I mean, I remember saying, like, are we Filipino? Are we Asian? And they were like, yeah. And because it was suppressed, it was when my family came from the Philippines to the United States, my dad's family. I mean, that was not safe. So to be Chinese Filipino of all things. So that was where for me, and that's, I say of all things because that's even rarer. I didn't know that until recently. And then the idea on my dad's mother's side, her literal last name was Pagan, and she was Taíno from Puerto Rico. So it was like, oh, okay, so there's also some colonialism there where there's the old ways that have been pushed out, and now everyone's Catholic. And why my father demanded that I grow up in the church when he didn't have any connection to it. Like, all these things started to make sense. And then on my mom's side, looking at, I mean, they're Scottish 100%. And again, the oppression. I mean, one of my relatives was beheaded for trying to start the Scottish Revolution at Stirling Castle. And of course, realizing, oh, that's why I'm mouthy. That's why I'm such a punk rocker. That's why, and going back to what we've forgotten, and I wouldn't be doing myself, this was very heavy, deep research where I figured out that I descend from Clan Campbell in Scotland and that their motto is forget not. And I was like, oh, okay, so this is not just about what we've forgotten, it's about what we remember. It's about, and the shamanic part of that, which anyone who's done, ceremonial work, there's, dismemberment journeys where it's like, remember me. And then there's welcome home and this remembering. And as you said, and now I'm thinking about it that way, of these different versions of ourselves. And again, that's also like a software update where, it might look different. You might have to learn how to reuse it again. And, but I think that's where the wonder comes in for me, of always leaving the window open for that, the stuff I don't understand. And the idea that there is a vibration to myself and my soul and, every other being on the planet and what they're doing here, and that if I can just focus on my own meter, as if it's a stereo or a GPS, if I can just focus on my own direction and remember what it's like to pull on my own bloodlines and lineage, that's where wonder meets me. And that's that intersection of that openness and surrender that is, and then the discernment of, but I mean, I always say in this work, I mean, you just cannot make this shit up. The amount of synchronicities, the amount of, it's just such a wonderful thing when you take that lens out that is the trauma. And also me, transmuting the idea of forgetting, repressed memories, not remembering, because a lot of survivors, we force ourselves, right? I want to know everything. I need to know everything. And throwing that out to the universe and building that trust and saying, "Oh, you'll tell me what I need to know."
Mm.
Right? And
Yeah.
allowing that to be part of the story too, is that I'll learn what I need to learn. And also with working with survivors in my practice, encouraging them to remember a time before, right? And what that felt like, and if you were, a toddler or a baby, or, what did it look like when you were in the womb? And that water can be that safe place. Water remembers us as the first element we meet in the womb. So
Yes.
those elements of wonder, I think, are integral to being able to survive, you know, adverse circumstances, right? And be able to remember a time before.
I love it. This is a really good place to tell our listeners www.amymiranda.com. See the book, follow Amy on social media. It's Amy Miranda handle. Whoop whoop.
Yay!
I know. Pick up the book, and I know that we didn't delve too deep into the book, but I kind of did that on purpose because I want people to understand the source that it came through is
Thank you.
such a beautiful source. It's not just, I came here to write this book, I'm gone. You earned this shit. You earned the right to be able to allow this information to come through you. So, as we wrap this up, what is on your heart? What do your helpers, your guides want to say to the people at this point? Anything.
Well, I think I go back to a ceremony ritual that you and I shared, and I think the main thing that's coming through right now that I keep being told is this idea of that a rising tide can float all the boats, and the correct boats this time, and that we get this choice every day of whether we want to choose love or fear. And, a lot of people would say that the opposite of love is hate, and I don't think it is. I think it's fear. And
Yeah.
I think if we choose love, and that doesn't mean toxic positivity, it means fierce compassion. And if we think of a loving parent, that we can choose fear, and we can be afraid of, that some members of our human family are in total crisis, and we could turn our backs, or we could react in anger, and we can see what that looks like already.
Yeah.
That if we choose instead to react out of love and fierce compassion, and again, that's fierce compassion. It's not, if someone's trying to hurt us, that we're, being continually being pummeled and not setting boundaries or not protecting ourselves, or not, what I think is most important right now, finding the others and saying, I can't carry this alone.
Yes.
So I think it's the return to that. I think it's the return to those community systems. And I think, whatever that looks like, again, for people who are either already living that way and, looking at social economy, or whether it's just cracking the window to the idea that maybe there's community for me in a place where I live or online, where I can actually become part of a new way of doing things, instead of being afraid to jump off of the ship that is sinking of capitalism and, the uninvited wanting us all to be separate. And inviting ourselves to a new way of doing things, and that can be gentle and easy, and it doesn't have to be excruciating. And I think that's where that remembering that lightness, and remembering that we can flood the system with more care and kindness, and that's exactly the opposite of what the uninvited want us to do. So I see that as such a revolutionary and shit disturbing act.
Uh, I love it. You guys definitely amymiranda.com. Pick up this book. It'll lead you home to yourself. It will lead you to home to yourself, and you'll be able to go on these adventures, these interdimensional like places, and then it inevitably will shift this ordinary realm. It inevitably will shift this ordinary realm. Amy, we got to do this more often, my dear. I
Oh, thank
just,
you so
I
much. This
love you
is
so
such
much.
a
Thank you
gift.
for
I
being
really do.
here.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And you guys, thank you for yet another episode. Remember, you are loved. You are loved. My dear friend Laura Gonzalez, that blue witch, she told me you are loved and I love you. Like, subscribe, do all the things, and be you, be your greatness as only you can be. I love you, and we'll see you on the flippity flip.